Hey gang, I replaced my mic cable so this one should sound smoother than the last one. Keeping on with the mild speculation of the various game loops that will eventually rear their heads in this game, let's push on to one that's near and dear to my heart, trade and transportation. Where I talked about exploration being the keystone loop in the last vid, I think trade and transportation will be the backbone. Do you want to hear why? Let's get this. Like the other mild speculation dives, I'll try to keep this one as short and as simple as possible. Just a quick caveat to start with, this is a speculative vid based on what I've seen so far and my best guesses. This isn't necessarily how CIG will complete this loop or even how they should. It's just my best guess on what might happen. As I usually say, I'm just a dude on the internet. Everything I say should be taken with a grain of salt. Good? Great, let's dive in. In the spirit of keeping things simple, let's break the merchant loop into two broad, all-encompassing categories. For lack of better words in my head, let's just call these transportation and trade. Transporters are basically just renting out space on their ships to move something from point A to point B. It doesn't really matter what the something is, because they are literally just a vehicle to move that thing from one place to another. On one hand, there's not a lot of risk because someone's actually paying them to fill up their ships. On the other, there's not as much reward either. Which brings us to trading. In trading, at least how I define it here, all the risk is on the trader. They're buying a thing with their own money. So as long as they're carrying that thing without selling it, it represents a lot of wealth that can be lost. On the flip side, since they have a tangible item that they are moving and selling, they get all the reward and all the profit from selling that thing too. So let's start with transporting. Since these are going to be broad categories, I'm defining transporting as any time someone is paying you to use the space on your ship. Thankfully for me, this definition allows me to not only include big haulers like the whole series, but also passengers, both regular old passenger transporting and the more smarmy touring loop. Because I'm jamming so many loops together on this one, this episode might run a hair longer than the others, so bear with. So no matter how they go, transporting will definitely come with canned missions, and some should be here pretty soon. Really, I could see some version of at least hauling and passenger transport being in later this year, probably in, if I had to guess, tier 0 before the end of the year. I expect the canned missions to be similar to what we have now for other loops, including the box missions. First, you'll get a mission to prove yourself and transport something low volume or low value, or probably both, from point A to point B. This should be coming pretty soon, probably around the time they drop the persistent hangars, and it's already showing on the deliverables. The real question is if they'll drop it to us before or after they drop Pyro. I'm kind of betting on before. I'm thinking probably the March patch, but we'll just have to wait and see on that one. But anyways, I could see the canned passenger missions working the same way. Maybe you have to carry a bunch of coach passengers from one place to another, probably a short distance, and then it gradually ramps up as your rep grows. The rep will definitely be a thing for these missions. My assumption is that high tier missions for both of these loops will be transporting either high value items or transporting items over very long distances, or through dangerous systems, or all three. Probably all three. As the verse grows beyond one or two systems, those missions will grow in value too. Think about transporting goods or people from, say, Terra del Sol, for example. I could also see there being missions that pay out according to risk. Not only is the cargo or passengers valuable, but they have a high likelihood of attracting attention, the wrong kind of attention. So on that note, there will certainly be illicit missions in this vein too. Like the missions now, there will be a dark side to these transport missions. So maybe transporting a high-ranking criminal, or a person with a big bounty on their head, or the usual drugs smuggling them into or across lawful systems. Things that'll definitely land you in Klesher, in other words. As your rep grows, either illicit or not, the payouts will grow. And CIG will definitely be using Quana in their mission structure to branch out the possibilities on these missions so they don't become the same old bunker mission over and over and over and over again. One time you might be waylaid by the law, another by a rival gang, or maybe even something totally unrelated. Maybe the dude tries to pirate you. Who can say? And by the dude here, I mean maybe your passenger. But the real meat of this one, at least for me, will be the player-to-player aspect. While most people playing the game right now are generalists, doing a little bit of everything, I think that's largely because of the current limitations of the content. Eventually, I'm hoping that the amount of content and variations in each loop and the specializations required for each loop will lead to people to naturally start specializing into specific loops. And when people start specializing, they'll need other people to do the things they're not specialized in. A group of miners, for example, might have the whole loop laid out for them. They'll have hand miners, ground vehicles, maybe everything up to an Orion. But actually hauling everything back to a port to sell it might be a boring sidetrack for them. Instead, they might just hire a hauler or similarly laid out group of haulers to just rent out that space and carry it back. A lot like my idea for the carnival, I could see groups covering each other's gaps with their own specialties. That's my hope anyways. When the verse is a bit larger, let's say years down the line, and permadeath is in, your respawn location might be a long ways from where you want to be, or where your team or org is, or where your ship is for that matter. And mildly related, but I think countdown timers for ships will eventually be measured in days and probably governed by quantum, how long it takes to find an available ship of your type or build one and get it to you. You get where I'm going. Right now, if you log out of a place and really want to fly your other ship, it's probably better worth the time to just reclaim your ship than it is to travel across Stanton to get it. And that's just Stanton. Right now, the mechanic's fine. But again, there isn't enough other content to justify punishing a player by taking away their ship for hours or even days. But eventually, that player will have other options, like buying a ticket on a commercial space liner or taking a trip on another player's transport ship. Someone with a big crime stat might pay for a ride with a smuggler just to avoid the high profile of traveling in their known ship, or to get them through jump points that are highly contested by security. That's the dream anyways. But it also leads to the last item on this particular list. Let's say your ship is destroyed, and your next ship is being delivered to you. Or let's say that the ship you need or want is logged off in another system, or just somewhere else that's inconvenient. You can take the time to travel where your ship is and then travel all the way back, or you can pay someone to deliver it to you. There's actually lore, a short story, of people doing exactly this in Star Citizen, so it's certainly something CIG has at least considered. While I doubt it's a big priority loop for them, especially in the current state of the game, I could see it being a pretty good niche loop in a few years. Just fly other people's ships to them. Get a great rep, could be fun. Or tedious. Either way, if players don't do it, Quana will. And likely hiring a human to do it will get your ship to you faster and more efficiently. And sure, that doesn't matter now when the wait time is minutes. But if CIG bumps it up to hours and likely days for the bigger and more rare ships, might be worth it to shave a few hours off that wait time. Just say it. Finally, the one part of this loop that I'm having the hardest time conceptualizing is the touring loop. For a human player, it's pretty easy. You take them to see something pretty, or something they haven't seen before, or a cool hunting trip. Knowing where those things are could be a specialty that gives a player or a touring org a big leg up over the competition. So really, this is one of those loops I could see being better aimed at PvP, as in actual people hiring actual people, not as in fighting each other. Where it gets sketchy is with the NPCs. I guess the canned missions could be some people wanting to see storm walls or whatever, and you get a rep based on how many you see and how quickly you get them there. I'm not sure. Maybe that's how they do it. An NPC gives a canned mission of take me to CX, and how quickly you can get them to that area, probably how well you fly, so no pulling a ton of G's, and how long you can loiter. And they have the mix master out there, so you'll probably need to be a bartender or chef, or at least hire some. So that last one is kind of a joke, but kind of not. In mild speculation on salvaging, I was saying that one of the goals of the loop could be to entice players that currently aren't in the game. That's the dream, because the wider the player base is, the more successful the game will be as a whole. A sci-fi flight simulator first-person combat game is a niche within a niche within a niche within a niche. The smaller you slice that pie, the smaller your player base will be, and the less ability the game will have to be able to sustain itself long term. Adding in other elements that draw in other types of players from beyond that niche is kind of key. Cooking simulators, they're a thing, a popular thing. So I could see CIG baking in a simplified cooking simulator into the game. One that people used to first-person shooters could take part in, but that a cooking simulator player would recognize and actually want to engage with, even if it were a far less involved version than what they were used to in games specific to that genre. And so, yeah, how complicated it'll be is a whole other level of speculation that I'm not going to get into here. But I could see CIG leaning into it a little bit, eventually. Maybe. So I don't know, what do you think? You think they'll involve a cooking simulator into this thing? So that's the transporting loop in a nutshell. It'll largely be driven by quanta, but not entirely. I definitely see niches for players here in all the loops, and that's a pretty good sign moving forward. So let's shift gears away from a loop of people paying for space on your ship and move it on over to you filling your ship with things you've bought on your own. Right off the bat, I'll say that this is the loop that, at least in my head, appeals to me the most, and has appealed to me the most since around 2014. On the surface, and again in my head, it seems to blend the best parts of exploring and making money. Travel out into the verse, find rare stuff, and sell it to people who want it. I think some aspect of that, regardless of what CIG does with the loop, will be inevitable. Hell, people are doing it in the game right now. There's effectively very little mechanisms in the game outside of permanence, looting, and the ability to transfer funds. Maybe that's all that's necessary, but of course we'd like to see more. Of course, what I'm talking about is a player-run marketplace. Other games have this, and if you're watching this vid, you probably know more about them than I do. So I probably don't have to go into a lot of detail here. But the basic gist is that players can find a thing, maybe a rare thing, maybe a valuable thing, maybe a thing that can only be found in one place, and throw a value on it. If they guess too high, no one will buy it for that. If they guess too low, then everyone will, but it's undervalued, and the value doesn't match the effort it took to procure it. That's the life of a trader. So here's the two sides of the trader coin that I see. What I just described in Inforunning. Despite the depth these two loops can have, the loop itself, or the loops themselves, aren't particularly complicated. So let's take a shallow dive into both. For both, this loop will probably start with an explorer going out and finding the thing. Of course, in the case of both, there's a strong chance that the explorer in this instance is also the trader or Inforunner, but that's not totally necessary. So there, someone finds the thing, be it information or some rare item. For the trader, it's then a matter of procuring the item. There's tons of options here, and this example in SitCon from a couple years back shows that CIG has thought about these different routes, stealing it, going Rambo and taking it, or even gasp buying it. These will all be options. And it might not even be something as rare and valuable as this Hadesian artifact. There's no reason why a trader couldn't fill their hold with all manner of things, even the sorts of things a hauler would carry around in their ship in bulk. This is largely how trade works in the game now, so I don't feel like I really need to dive too deeply here. Unlike hauling, where you're being paid to take something from point A to point B, which isn't in the game yet, but is coming pretty soon, with trading, you are buying the thing and then deciding where you want to take it that will maximize the profit. You take on all the risk because you have to drop that money up front, but you also get all the reward. In the hauling loop, you're more likely being paid for the volume and possibly the risk. Transporting something valuable through pirate-infested space will probably net you more than transporting, I don't know, kitty litter through Terra, for example. In trading, it's all on you. What matters is what you bought it for and what you can sell it for directly. And there could easily be times where a trader will see value in something, but the rest of the verse just hasn't caught up yet. Or the situation where that thing will become valuable hasn't happened yet. Or it just seems like a useful thing to have a stockpile of, basically just storing it away in their persistent hangar. In that case, the trader might eat the cost and then just sit on the thing. Don't make that dirty. Unlike the other loops, but similar to the touring loop, this could be a hard one to make canned missions for. I can think of missions of bring me X, and X is something that's kind of hard to find or just out of the way. Like, say, bring me a Hadesian artifact and I'll pay you 30 mil. That sort of thing I could see happening. So, actually, I guess I just answered my questions. Variations on that, I suppose. And that's where shops will come in. At a guess, the Banu Merchantman and the Kraken Privateer won't be the only player-run shops in the verse. I think that's a given, as is some of the base building modules will definitely be shops. Unlike trading, where you're bringing a thing from point A to point B, with a shop, you just have to procure the thing and then bring the shop to a region, or bring the thing to one of your shops. Then you have a central location where that thing and other things can be sold from. I think we'll definitely be getting more shop ships, and as much as it hurts me to say it, we'll probably get those before the Merchantman or Privateer. Hopefully one of them is the sloop idea I pitched CIG a year or two back. Anyways, shops. So with shops, as opposed to being A to B trading and hauling, your ship is the location. So you will either go where the people are to sell them the things they want, like a traveling salesman, in other words, or the people will be expected to come to you. Granted, I think the latter is more likely in the bigger ships like the Merchantman, particularly the Privateer, which has landing pads to accommodate that action. I think, like most of the loops, this one will come down to risk reward. If you plop your shop down in, say, a city, for example, everything you sell is probably going to get taxed. Plop down the boonies? Probably not. But you'll be way more vulnerable to someone just taking your stuff. So that's something to keep in mind. Taking off on a quick tangent for a moment here, I'm going to talk about the game's economy on a macro scale for a moment. From a game perspective, you need people wanting to make money to keep playing the game. But as most players are finding out playing this alpha, if there's a cap on what you can spend your money on, and there's not enough to drain your resources over time, procuring it after a certain point becomes pointless and you lose interest in the game, effectively having beaten that game. To counter this, there has to be in-game mechanics that are both actively and passively draining your wealth. With the mining loop, we're already seeing a small aspect of this, with the refining portion costing money in order to pull off. Yes, you get more money in the end if you refine your ore, and more than you would have if you would have sold it raw, but less if there was no charge for refining at all. And if you have your own refining ship, you'll probably have to pay for the materials that allow you to refine things, so like chemicals. So yet another way to drain your resources as you engage in that loop. Expect something like that to be the norm for all the loops, not just trade, transport, mining, and that sort of thing. And I fully expect there to be excise and import tax, or bribes and unlawful systems, to help him in the wealth. With the engineering loop coming in, ships will break down faster and need more specific repairs, or they'll break down even more and more often. And these breakdowns will take considerably longer than a button press on your Mobi and 15 seconds of wait time for the screen to automatically flash until your ship's repaired. You'll have to manually repair those parts. You'll have to wait for those parts to come in if they're not available. All the while, you're accruing dock and mooring costs. And also during that time, crew have to be paid, fed, and the like. And you might be waiting for days in some backwater system as parts slowly make their way across the verse to you via a trader. See, I brought it back eventually. Like most of this, I'm not sure if this is the route CIG will go, but something like that, something to passively drain a player's resources, will definitely be a thing in this game, so get ready for that. So on to Inforunning, the last one on my list for this particular loop. I don't know if CIG will ever implement true mass into the game, but they should. So someone running, say, a full load of hydrogen gas should have a totally different acceleration and maneuvering profile from someone running a volume of, say, gold. Again, they suggested something like that in the long ago, but I think they might have just dialed it back to something like a calculation on SCUs. So the flat number of boxes, no matter what those boxes contain, determines the acceleration of your ship. Fingers crossed they reconsider that. Where was I? All right, Inforunning. So unlike other types of trading and hauling, Inforunners are running data, information. They don't really need big holds to carry stuff, they just need servers. To me at least, Inforunning looks like a fascinating loop. Inforunning, at least how I see it, will be data, beacons, claims, and like on the location of stuff. Like I was saying in the salvaging and exploration loop, Inforunners will be the ultimate middlemen. They'll be the people that get the locations of the exploitable resource, whatever that might entail, to the people who'd be willing to pay the most for it. Again, I think most people will fill that role themselves, but I think there will definitely be others who are willing to hire that loop out to trustworthy people or NPCs. And as the data spikes of the Herald and the upcoming hacking game loop suggest, data will be a thing that can be a commodity in and of itself, a valuable one that can be stolen. So to me, that's interesting. The data runners we know about so far are mostly based on speed, the Herald and the MSR being two of the faster ships in the game, and the Caterpillar, but there's always got to be an oddball. I suspect most of the cargo movers will have some ability to move data, but the purest data runners are fast, and there's a reason. The longer data is sitting out there, the less valuable it becomes. Let's say you're a bounty hunter, for example, and you get a hot tip that a huge bounty was seen in Grim Hex 20 minutes ago. Would that be worth more or less than if you received the same tip 3 weeks later? Same thing with the location of mineable motherlode, or in the site of a big battle, or that rare item that somebody's been looking for. The longer that data sits on a ship, the greater the chances that someone else stumbles on the thing and exploits it first. So with that in mind, there's a good chance that data running will end up focusing on that running part. And the best data runners will be the ones that get there the quickest. I would think that the can missions will likely have time limits on them, or a countdown that determines how much you're paid. Kind of like a hybrid between racing and hauling. And of course, some data is just more dangerous than others. That Pirate King might not want his information getting out and put out traps to stop you, or others might try to grab you just to steal the data they know is valuable. For that matter, I could see illicit counter missions happening just to steal the data or just preventing it from getting where it's going. And I could see player groups paying for the same on both sides of that legal coin. And I could see there being missions, some intricate ones, around those themes. Outside of the information like exploitable resources, I think we'll eventually get things that would make sense as a digital commodity. So think like books and research and stuff like that could be data that could be run. And by the same token, could also be data that could be stolen. But with all these things, all these loops I'm talking about, the real question is less how they'll end up working, which I'm honestly just guessing at, and more, when are we getting them? Well, let me tell you, I don't know. Some of these things are waiting on tech, but many of them are just waiting on resources, or low on the priority list. It's why we've had the same box missions and bunker missions for something like, what, 4 or 5 years? But some of these are actually on the near horizon. Freight runs, basically hauling, should be in the first half of next year, along with those persistent hangars, which should open up some options for trading. Think persistent crates of guns or armor you've looted, that sort of thing. And hopefully we get pyro sometime around June and even more options start opening up. And maybe someday we'll get a better version of loading our holes than, say, pulling up to a station with a full load, running in, selling the stuff, running out, undocking, going to the loading zone, unloading, redocking, running in again, buying stuff, undocking, going to the loading zone. Yeah. CIG can do better than that. I hope. Maybe. That's all I have for this one, gang. Catch you next time.